couple of times, as you know, the Mi Amigo drifted and ended up on hitting sandbanks, I mean, almost sinking, but not quite, until that fateful day. And I mean, I'm hopeless with dates, but that's one date that, of course, will always stick in my mind. Underneath the boat, it was wearing away. It was an old ship. I mean, she was built in 1920 something and had been through a hard life as a working vessel. I'd mended about 20 holes in the bottom of the ship. I mean, the bottom was thin, to say the least. It had been there so long, it wasn't going to sink. As Ronan would say, the witches were watching over you. And I think there was something watching over us to a certain extent. Yes, the boat was old, it was rusty, it was maintained as best we could out at sea, but I mean, in its final days, we had an engine that didn't work properly, we had a rudder that slammed around from left to right all the time with the waves, we had no wheel to steer it with, even if you could get the engine running, but the radio station worked. It was, to all intents and purposes, a hulk.
The Mi Amigo began life in 1921 as the SS Marguerite in Kiel, Germany, to carry cargo around the Baltic. When sold in 1927, she was renamed the Olga. In 1941, she was commandeered by the German army, and in 1960, she was fitted out as a radio ship for the Swedish station Radio Nord.
Koppla på! Radio Nord! Och koppla av med Radio Nord!
When Radio Nord closed, she was bought by Australian music publisher Alan Crawford, renamed Mi Amigo, and after refits in Texas, Spain and Ireland, was launched off the Essex coast as Radio Atlanta in April 1964, a month after the launch of Radio Caroline.
This is Radio Caroline on 199, England's first commercial radio station. My name's Simon D, with you for the next 2 hours.
In July 64, Atlanta merged with Caroline. The Mi Amigo stayed off Essex and became home to Radio Caroline South. The original Caroline ship, Federica, sailed to the Isle of Man and became Caroline North.
This is a Caroline gale warning.
In January 1966, the Mi Amigo drifted and grounded at Holland-on-Sea, Essex. After a refit in Holland, she returned with a new powerful transmitter in May of that year.
Yes, indeed, and there you are. There are a few of our little things. Remember, whenever you hear this sound... Yeah, Caroline, of course, it's the sound of a nation.
After defying the British government's anti-offshore radio legislation in August 1967, Radio Caroline was silenced when, after running up debts, she was towed to Holland in March 1968, along with her sister ship, Federica. In 1972, the Mi Amigo was sold at auction and returned off the Dutch coast as Radio 199, Radio Seagull, and again as Radio Caroline. In August 1974, when the Dutch government legislated against offshore radio, Radio Caroline again remained defiant and sailed back to the British coast, where she continued to broadcast until that fateful day in March 1980.
A certain amount of subterfuge, because the ship was never dry docked. It probably should have been, and the authorities could probably have insisted that it be dry docked, and I've got little doubt that the condition of the ship would have probably, ruled out any question of taking the ship back out to sea again. We just didn't have the money to do elaborate repairs to the hull, and if those had been imposed upon us, I think the project would have foundered at that point. So there was a certain amount of sleight of hand and skullduggery, and we did get the ship out.
On the 18th of January 1979, the Mi Amigo developed a serious leak.
Crew abandoned ship, and there was a group of us, about 10 in all, various mechanics and radio jockey people. We put a group together, picked the best out of them, and off we went out to the Mi Amigo. Peter had got out, British Chicago had got out there the night before and got one pump running, as I remember. And we spent about a week on there initially, around about 10 of us pumping and trying to get things working. The ship was full of water completely, cabins were flooded, engine room was awash, transmitter room seemed okay. After a week, these guys went off, just leaving leaving 5 of us out there. And I think that's where it's sort of quite interesting, because we ate and ate and ate, had 3-course meals and God knows what Tony Allen was cooking for us. The boat that was due to arrive at the end of the week never did. And some 6 or 7 weeks later, finally we had a tender, in which time I think Johnny Lewis had lost a couple of stone and gained an ulcer, and I'd also lost an awful lot of weight, and we were all pretty well knackered really. And Johnny and I went off and they got sorted out, and the rest of them had a good feast and things. Sort of, they persevered until the following Easter, when we went back on the air with the Dutch Radio Caroline.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. We're so glad you could attend. Come inside, come inside. Radio Caroline.
Chicago 10, or is it Chicago's greatest hits? Only the beginning. Fast coming up on 5 minutes past 5 this Easter Sunday evening. Easter Sunday, 1979. This is Europe's first and only album station, Caroline.
You may not have appreciated the dangers you were really putting yourself into, but I think the younger you are, the more of those sort of risks you take, and you really don't consider the potential outcomes. It was choice. We knew the situations, we knew what we could get into. I was doing something I believed in. The overriding thing was, we've got to keep this thing going. We'd had some very bad weather. We knew there was a supply boat, a tender on the way from Holland. And to avoid detection and the risk of being arrested when we were landing back on shore, it had been arranged to do this with 2 boats. Theoretically, the boat with the new crew would arrive, deposit the new crew, then go off and go fishing or whatever it was going to do to cover its tracks. And then the other boat would arrive to take the returning crew off the boat. In fact, it happened the other way round. The boat that came to take the returning crew arrived first. The other boat, I think, turned tail and run, or gone to shelter from the storm, basically. Everybody left the ship except 4 of us. 4 broadcasters. Even the captain left the ship. I mean, we used to say we didn't need captains. It was our ship and we were at anchor, so, he was going to do what we told him rather than the other way around. But even the captain went. We had 4 broadcasters on the ship, of whom I was the most senior at the time. 3 English, myself, Stevie Gordon and Nick Richards. And 1 new Dutch guy, his first time ever on the ship, who was running the taped programs and waiting for his colleagues to arrive on the next boat. That man is now a very successful businessman, Toon Louterhuis, who runs Skyrock in Holland. But this was his first radio job, his first time ever on the ship.
Het is 5 uur op Caroline en het is op het ogenblik onmogelijk om nieuws te geven. Het nieuws zal er weer zijn morgen om 8 uur. We hebben alleen even een nummer voor de mensen aan land. Nummer 243, en het is nu volledig van toepassing.
And Caroline, as an album station, was on at night, and the Dutch service was on in the daytime. So we tended to sleep in the day, or get as much sleep as we could in the day. And I remember having gone to bed at about, I suppose, 4 or 5 in the morning, something like that. And after, well, it must have only been 2 or 3 hours in bed, I hear a banging on the door, my cabin door bursts open, and there's Toon saying, "Tom, you've got to get up, you've got to get up, there's something outside the door." Something outside the door? Yes, there's something, I don't think it's supposed to be there. So what are you talking about? Is it a ship, or is it... No, it's a big metal thing. So I dragged myself out of bed and went up and swung the door out, open onto the deck, and he was right. There was a big metal triangular beacon, which is it was a wartime radar beacon. They used to have a path of them running up the Thames estuary. The nearest one was normally, I suppose, 3 or 4 miles away, except it wasn't. It was now about 50 yards away. We'd broken the anchor and we'd drifted, and we talked to the Coast Guards and told them where we were, what we were doing.
But your position originally was moored in the knock deep, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, yeah, a couple of numbers for anyone who might be, excuse me, who might be listening in the office, or anybody who knows anybody in our organisation on land. Would you please telephone somebody in the office and give them the following numbers: number 59 and number 60.
We were going to drop the spare anchor, so we spent all our time getting the anchor down. Eventually we dropped the spare anchor, eventually it held, eventually the storm abated a bit.
This system's Coast Guard, Roger. We'd prefer you to remain on VHF if your batteries can hold out. We have Sheerness lifeboat anticipated at the moment. Would you prefer the lifeboat to stand by you, over?
Coast Guard Mi Amigo. No, I don't think the lifeboat is necessary at the moment.
The Coast Guards insisted on calling the lifeboat. We said, we're okay, we don't need it. There's a tug on the way, we knew there was. But they insisted on sending the lifeboat, who sat there for hours trying to persuade us to come off. And we just said, no, we're not coming off.
We got a shout from the Coast Guard last night about 6:20, letting us know that the Mi Amigo had dragged her anchors to the long sands bank. They asked us to launch and proceed. We was down with them about 8 o'clock.
Listen for more news from the Caroline Roadshow every hour. It's 30 seconds now before 7 o'clock. Just before Roy Masters, we have a couple of numbers for our office. That's number 59, 59, number 59, and number 60, 60, number 60. Number 60 will be extreme in approximately 2 hours.
By that time, they'd taken the ground, and we had to wait 2 hours for him to float off. We was a bit anxious at this time because he'd taken the ground hard, and that we knew on refloating he might have sustained some damage. We was in contact with the ship on the VHF, spoke to the occupants. They said they were making water. Their main pump had wrapped up, but the secondary pump, they was having a bit of difficulty starting. They subsequently got this going. The water at this time, they said, was about 6 inches above the engine room plates. I suggested at this moment of time that they abandon the ship, as the conditions were, the sea conditions out there were very confused.
But unfortunately, where the spare anchor had held was on the edge of a sandbank, and the ship sat on the chain and smashed the bottom through. The rest, I think, is history. You know, it's, that was the end of the Mi Amigo. There wasn't anything anyone could have done to save it.
It was very, very wild. We had about 2 foot of water in the ship, in the bilges. The weather forecast was that the seas were going to get worse, and we thought it would be better to go into the lifeboat. Well, the lifeboat had been standing by for about 2.5 to 3 hours, and they had been urging us to come up, although we had declined their offer. Then we called back and said, well, okay, I think we're ready to go now.
As I said, the lifeboat had been standing by for a long time. It was late at night. Stevie Gordon and myself put on a storm tape eventually. When the lifeboat said they were going to take us off, we said our goodbyes and said that we'd hoped we'd be back, and God willing, etc., etc., and if the pumps could cope.
Radio Caroline, broadcasting on 319 metres, 963 kilohertz. Well, we're sorry to tell you that due to the severe weather conditions and also to the fact that we're shipping quite a lot of water, we're closing down, and the crew are at this stage leaving the ship. Obviously, we hope to be back with you as soon as possible, but we'd just like to assure you all on land that there's nothing to worry about. We're all quite safe. Just for the moment, we'd like to say goodbye. Tom?
Yeah, it's not a very good occasion, really. I have to hurry this because the lifeboat is standing by. We're not leaving and disappearing. We're going onto the lifeboat, hoping that the pumps can take it. If they can, we'll be back. If not, well, I don't like to say it.
I think we'll be back one way or another,
yeah,
Tom.
I think so.
We did take one back close each to start with, to the very back of the ship.
where the lifeboat was going to try and take us off, but the sea was so rough it was really impossible. In the end we were taken off from the side of the ship and left all our belongings, completely everything, all our clothes, and just came off with things we stood on.
They tried to put a breeches buoy on the back of the boat, and the idea being to slide us down a line to the lifeboat, but it was too rough. The lifeboat one minute was 15 foot up in the air above the deck level, and the next minute was in a huge trough below, and you just couldn't have done it. And so in the end, the skipper of the lifeboat said he'd make, asked how many people there were. We said 4, and he said he'd make 4 approaches, 1 person at a time, be ready on the leeward side of the boat, the side with no wind, as it were, and be ready to jump when we say, just please do what we say. And we did. 1, 2, 3, Canary, 4. Or was it 1, 2, Canary, 3, 4? I forget. They were very, very pissed off when we threw the canary's cage. But afterwards they realised, I mean, what can you do? You can't just release it into the wild, it would be dead. You can't leave it there, it'll be dead. You put the canary before yourself. I mean, I don't know whether it's an intelligent thing to do. It probably isn't.
We could actually see the bottom of the lifeboat well above the height of our deck. Gives you an indication of how high the waves were. Probably from the time we switched the transmitter off and all went on deck, it was probably about 45 minutes before we were all safely on the lifeboat. We were really waiting for it to get very, very close before we would jump, because it's a case of one slip, and if you'd gone between the two, you would have stood no chance whatsoever.
We asked the lifeboat to hang around until the lights went out, which would mean that there was no more electricity and half the pumps wouldn't work. And they did. They were brilliant. The lifeboat guys were brilliant. You know, it was exceedingly rough. We were at very close proximity to a sandbank. The lifeboatmen were putting themselves and their boat at risk. Then we had a dramatic, rough voyage back to where did we go to? Sheerness, the Sheerness lifeboat. When we were duly arrested and fed warm food, soup and whatever, because the police were very good. They really were very good. And then we were bunged in a cell for a little while. Yeah, it's a strange experience. I mean, the police didn't really consider us as doing illegal things, but they had to do something, you know, and they couldn't have been nicer about it all, really.
The pirate radio ship Caroline has sunk off the Essex coast after breaking free from her moorings in a force 9 gale.
You just told me today that it's 25 years ago. I couldn't believe it. So very, very sad.
Is that right?
If you saw me cry, you would have seen me cry.
Take your name again.
I cried. I actually had, what was his name? Mark Dezzani phoned me from Holland, and he kept saying, Georgina, don't tell me it's not true. I said, what? He said, the Mi Amigo sank. I said, I'm sorry, Marky, but it has gone. And I stood and held the phone, talking to him from Holland for 3/4 of an hour while he was crying.
All you could see of the Mi Amigo today as she slowly sank was her mast. Earlier, as the sea gushed in, the crew had been forced to abandon ship. £100,000 worth of equipment and a priceless collection of tapes and archives went down with her.
I was on land. I used to do the radio link for them, and it was all pretty serious stuff. I think we were all devastated.
Lost, I think. You didn't know what the situation was. You knew that the ship had gone. Everyone was trying to work out what they were going to do next. We were being interviewed by reporters. Television, radio, everybody was there. It was a piece of history.
Off the Kent coast, the pirate radio ship Caroline has sunk.
Mi Amigo, the ship from which Radio Caroline broadcast, has sunk.
And sadly, the Mi Amigo goes down.
Radio Caroline sinks, and it's the end of an era of British broadcasting.
The pop pirates of Radio Caroline say they'll try to broadcast illegally again, even though their ship's now at the bottom of the sea.
Because we thought that we were going to make it at low water, and we were hoping we were going to be able to get aboard it. That was the plan. But things don't go to plan, as we all know. And it didn't work. Well, Chicago was going to swim across, but even the state it was in, because there's equipment on the bridge, but we persuaded him, and I think he saw sense in the end. It was far too dangerous.
You could argue that perhaps at times the condition of the ship was not as safe as it should be, be that as it may, in actual fact, nobody ever suffered as much as a broken finger or toe.
The Mi Amigo was something that the Ross Revenge will probably never be. There was an atmosphere that you'll never replace. There's a beautiful ship and a camaraderie, if you like, between the group that were on there. We were all brothers and sisters, if you like, and maybe a lot younger as well. The Ross Revenge, as we're on now, is a far superior ship, but I don't think it ever had the same atmosphere as the Mi Amigo. Maybe we could get away with more on the Mi Amigo than we could on here. And so nothing actually worked on the Mi Amigo apart from the transmitter, I think, and the kettle.
I think everybody's seen the photographs. They're the photographs we took that day. Very sad.
I think it's one of the only ways that you could have got on either the front page or the lead article inside page of pretty much every newspaper in the country. I can't think of many other ways you could do it. That and all the music press. I mean, together, John Lennon being shot is the only other example I can give you of that happening. Now, it's not to say we're on the same league as that, but I mean, it took some doing and it interested the public because it was it's part of history, not just British history. It's part of music history, it's a part of history.
Radio Caroline, the elements succeed where the law fails.
From all of us, for the moment, goodbye and God bless.
I'll make her mine. Her name is Caroline. She is the fairest of them all. And I'll come running when she calls. She is the girl of my dreams. My dreams, she's on my mind forever it seems. It seems with her forever we'll dream together. Just me and Caroline. Caroline. Caroline.